Something that I think has inspired all of us. And she represents President Zelensky here and has had a very interesting career. She started her career at the International Foundation for Electoral Systems in the early 1990s. I'm on the board of the IFES, and she represented President Zelensky and the Ukrainian government on Tuesday night at the IFES Awards dinner. She then went to the Western Newly Independent States Enterprise Fund, which was an investment fund for Ukraine and Moldova set up in the Clinton administration. I sit on that board, and she had a fabulous career in helping set up entire industries, modernizing the Ukrainian economy. She was then asked to go into public service. She was Deputy Minister of Finance of Ukraine, and then she was Minister of Finance of Ukraine. She then went into the private sector, and then she got a phone call saying, your country needs you again. And so she came here. She's a really unbelievably effective advocate for Ukraine, and it's a real privilege to have her. Let me just also mention, Dr. John Hamre was going to introduce and make some introductory remarks. He's not well, not feeling well, so you got me, sorry. But I think I'll do my best to stand in for him. But it's such a privilege for CSIS to host Ambassador Markarova. We really are so grateful for you for being here, and we're going to have a conversation today. And so thank you so much, Ambassador. Please welcome Ambassador Oksana Markarova. Okay. Thanks, Ambassador. Thanks. Okay. So, Ambassador, tell us about what is happening in Ukraine, and what do you need from the United States and Ukraine's friends?
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here together with my team, Katerina Smagli, who works with you and all the expert community. And it's really has been a war which was very difficult for all the 8 years, because just to remind that Ukraine attacked us not 112 days ago as we count today, but 8 years ago. But the last 112 days have been the experience that I think no one was fully prepared for, even though we knew the intent was always there. Even though we knew Russia always wanted to destroy not only us, but try to return, as they say, you know, the countries that they put in their sphere of interest somehow. And we know that goes way beyond Ukraine, and the threat is not only to us. But you know, this 112 days, the battle that we had was changing from the day one. So first, as you recall, a lot of people said that Ukraine would fall within 3 days, you know, Kyiv would fall within a week, the government would flee, you know, there were all kinds of expectations. But we can now say that there were two things that the majority of experts got wrong. One is they underestimated Ukraine, and two, all of us, including overestimated Russia. Now, it doesn't mean the battle is going to be very easy. It's not. And the battle that we have now, you don't see it on TV, but it's more brutal and difficult than anything we had during 112 days, because at the beginning of the war, there was a battle for Kyiv. You know, you saw the rockets flying pretty much everywhere. You know, the destruction of cities like Kharkiv and Chernihiv is unbelievable. The city of Mariupol literally does not exist. You know, 95% of the city is destroyed. But the artillery duel we have right now in the south and east, especially in the east, is tens of thousands of rounds of shells shot at us on a daily basis. You know, they learned the lesson that people is their weakest link and is our greatest asset. So they're trying not to come into battle with our armed forces. And that's why they're just shelling from afar with all the artillery, MRLSs, and again, as much as they are war criminals, people without morale, people without you know, any red lines, but there are so much bigger amount of them and the equipment. So it's still very devastating, and our fight is exactly the same as it was from the beginning from our side, is to hold, stop, and try to liberate as much as possible. So what do we need for that? You know, the question, sorry for the long
No, but it's important.
way towards what do we, every phase, I mean, of course we need weapons. It's a number one ask. You heard me saying that everywhere, and the constant line is we are very grateful for everything that the U.S. and other allies are providing us with, and U.S. clearly is in a leadership role here. No other country provided us as much assistance as the United States, and we need more, again, because the enemy doesn't stop, the enemy doesn't change the tactics. If anything, they become more brutal and trying to, you know, not even try to occupy, but essentially try to destroy. So we need the continued support with the weaponry, and again, it shifts now to the artillery and the MRLSs and the air support, so everything that is tailored to this battle. The second is sanctions, because again, as much as the majority of wars are won on the battlefield, especially when you are meeting with the enemy that is fighting the 19th century war, and this is what Russia is doing. But we also need to, A, punish Russia for what they've done, but B, also to weaken their capacity and possibility to finance this war. Thus, sanctions are very important. And we need the support for Ukraine, because again, 50% of economy is destroyed. We are collecting less than 50% of the revenues that we used to collect. At the same time, the needs of people multiplied, because we have 14 million of people combined who either internally displaced people inside the country or live in the areas that are under constant fire, which means that they don't have water, food, you know, electricity is on and off. So actually the government, and again, it's a full-fledged hot war. So we don't have a lot of international organizations that can come in and serve people near Kharkiv or on the occupied areas, which puts the Ukrainian government, which again is remarkable that the whole government is operational under this, the whole banking system works. But we are in a unique position to be able to reach out to everyone and support. That's why, you know, this huge mismatch between the revenues and the spending that we need, and which amounts now to $5 billion per month. And we're very grateful that the U.S. has been helpful there as well, because $7.5 billion in this new supplementary budget is a direct budget support, and $1 billion from the previous 13.6 also went directly into the budget. So the goal is how to get more weapons, more sanctions, more support, so that we can stop Russia faster, because A, it's going to be much more expensive the longer it goes for Ukraine in terms of lives and our economy and our, you know, peaceful life, which is no longer there anywhere, but also more expensive for everyone who believes in democracy. And, you know, in general, I think the answer to this question, whether Ukraine can win, and more importantly, whether Russia will be defeated, is a very important question for everyone who believes in the same values and in international rule of law.
So absolutely, the stakes are far beyond Ukraine. Ambassador, I heard you speak several weeks ago, and I was so impressed, and I came up here and said, I was so inspired what you had to say, and you said, I'm just a soldier. And I wanted to just talk about the sense that the whole society of Ukraine, I get the sense, is very committed. Could you talk about the level of commitment in your society and how your country the entire country has mobilized and responded to this threat?
Yes, I think this is the key ingredient of the fact that we were able to stand for 112 days. I mean, of course, our president, who has shown remarkable bravery and leadership in this time, who stayed in Kyiv, who said he will fight with the people, for the people in this war. But the fact is that it's not only the armed forces of Ukraine that Russia met when they crossed the border and attacked the country again in 2022. It's not only the veterans who we knew would go ahead and volunteer to defend the country, but it's everyone. So when you compare the numbers of our military forces, even if we mobilize the maximum and you compare what Russia has already, even without counting what they can potentially mobilize, I mean, of course, there is a huge mismatch. They outnumber us by number of people, number of tanks, number of aircrafts, helicopters, you name it. But they are not fighting with Ukrainian armed forces only. They are fighting with all 40 million of Ukrainians. So regardless of whether we are, you have seen the pictures of farmers towing the tanks. You have seen people resisting in Kherson that has been under occupation for more than now almost for two months, and people still coming out without any weapons, and they know they're in danger. I mean, we know what happened to people in Bucha and Irpin and other places which were occupied, how people were killed, raped, tortured, just for the tattoo with anything Ukrainian on your body, just for the fact that they think that somebody of your relatives is in the armed forces, just for speaking Ukrainian, just for telling them, either in Ukrainian or Russian, that we don't want you there, go back home. So the resistance has been remarkable everywhere, and from day one of the war, we saw a remarkable unity, again, regardless of the political differences of anything else. All TV channels in Ukraine, on day one, joined forces, and they created what we call now the media marathon. So the majority of TV channels pool their resources together, and they split the time between them. And they have the same, they almost work as one TV channel that just, supports each other 24/7 and use all of their resources throughout the country to get the signal everywhere. All the people, who has been lawyers, teachers, bread growers, who has a stamina and also, qualifications to fight. They signed up for the territorial defense, they train, and some of them are not only guarding their own villages or towns, they are also at the front line if they're capable. Whoever cannot do that, do whatever they can. So people volunteer, people help the internally displaced people. I mean, the whole country is actually working with one goal only, to win.
I've seen surveys from the International Republican Institute that talk about the very high level of support and morale in the country. So it's quite noticeable. I mean, the approval rating for President Zelensky in the country is extremely high. There's a high level of morale and confidence in the future of how Ukraine how the outcome of the war will be from the Ukrainian perspective. I think it's very encouraging to have those. You need those sorts of levels of support to succeed, and it's clear just in terms of the response and the mobilization that you were just talking about, Ambassador. We've had a number of votes in the U.S. Congress to support Ukraine. For the most part, they've been very strong and very encouraging. There's been some folks, unfortunately, in my party and the Republican Party that haven't come along the way that they should in supporting Ukraine. What is your message to folks in the United States who may have not wanted to, who didn't vote, which I would describe as the right way? I think we ought to be giving Ukraine whatever they want. Whatever financial needs, we ought to give it to you. Whatever military assets, we ought to give it to you. But there was a significant number of folks, and I worry that number over time, what is your message to them? What would you say to them for those folks who didn't come along on those votes? And because there will be other votes.
Thank you. Well, Ukraine is a democracy like the U.S., and we understand how difficult it is to get all the decision making in place in order to move forward, because you have to discuss it with all the stakeholders. And unlike now, and I agree with you that it's not only encouraging, but it's actually surprising and remarkable how united Ukraine is, because during the peaceful times, we really enjoy our democracy and we use it to the fullest. So we criticize each other, we fight with each other, which again, to some extent, that's what democracy is, right? You have to be able to debate, to voice your differences, to criticize. And, the civil society is a very vibrant part of Ukrainian society. So when I was in the government, and I was not a typical kind of governmental official, because I spent all my life in private equity and only came after the Revolution of Dignity. And the first week after I became the government official, the whole people in the civil society who used to be friends suddenly started criticizing me, which again, it's a good thing. You want to have your officials, whether appointed or elected, under control. So again, it's part of the democracy. But, you know, coming back to your question about why is it important and why is it a good policy for the United States, regardless of party affiliation, to support Ukraine, I'll give you a couple of reasons. First, a practical reason. US is part of NATO, and a number of NATO members have been directly threatened by Putin. So we know it's of course about Ukraine for Russia, but it's beyond Ukraine. It's not only about Ukraine. We have heard Mr. Putin repeatedly, publicly saying that the collapse of the former Soviet Union, and now he goes back as much as to Peter the Great with his nonsense speeches, public nonsense speeches, that essentially you can clearly, and he names the names of the countries. So you clearly see that the Baltic states are under threat, that Poland is under threat, that some of the Moldova is under threat, Sweden, and some other NATO countries are under threat. Now, it's the obligation under Article 5 for any NATO member, when one is attacked, all is attacked. So if we fall, it's a 100% guarantee that Poland or others will be attacked.
He's going to come for them.
So it means that the US will not only have to spend more to stop him there, but to send the boots on the ground. So I think it's a very fair deal that we're talking about here, that we all know he already attacked us. He attacked us twice. He's fighting this brutal war now. It's existential for us, but it's also very important for all NATO members to help us to stop Putin while it's still in Ukraine. So that's reason number one. And it's actually, you know, more efficient to spend money now to stop this dictator while he's still in his 1939, 1940 mode, than to pull all the resources when we're in 1942-43 and the war is everywhere in Europe. The second reason is, I think, you know, for every country that is a democracy and truly believes in these values, this battle is so much bigger than just about whether Ukraine will exist, whether Russia will be able to do it. Because essentially what we see here is an autocratic regime, a nuclear power that in early 90s already attacked Moldova and created this problem in Transnistria. In 2008 attacked Georgia. In 2014 attacked us. After that, shut down MH17 from the skies with innocent passengers just flying to their vacations, poisoned people on the streets of London, and attacked us again. Now the question is, if they can get away with it again now, why are we pretending that the international rule of law, the architecture that was put after the World War, really works? What would stop not only Putin, but everyone else who thinks China redrawing the lines or redrawing the borders or swallowing the neighbor who's smaller or not that powerful? What would stop them? So I think the help here is a help to any country, any democratic country, to show that democracy can also be strong and can deliver for its people. And the third is, I think this fight that we have now, and a lot of people discussed it as the David versus Goliath fight. I think it's in the heart of a lot of Americans. I think this fight is something that Americans remember in their genes from the fight for independence, and we approach now the greatest holiday in the US. It's the fight that America, always held very close in the heart. It's the fight for your home, your ability to decide how you want to live. Your ability to elect your especially local officials, somebody somebody you trust, somebody you hold accountable because you went to school with them, you know them, they live next door. I mean, this is something that is very also, in the heart of Ukrainians. So that's why we see such a massive support among American people. I've never seen, I mean, I studied in the US in 1999. I traveled to the US many times. I spoke to many people who supported us a lot and who didn't support us, but never in the past 30 years I've seen
all the flags,
such
all
a
the bumper
support
stickers.
among ordinary Americans.
I think, Ambassador, we have a sense of fairness and fair play. At least we like to hope we do. And this is so against fair play. This is just so deeply unfair and so wrong. I think it deeply offends Americans. I agree with you about everything you've said, but I think there's this sense of this is just so unfair. It's dirty. It's disgusting. It's offensive. So I so agree with you. The Ambassador, that's great. I want to talk about the future. I've been to Ukraine a number of times. I went with the International Republican Institute to observe several elections, the 2014 election, the 2019 election. I've been to your great country with the Western Newly Independent States Enterprise Fund board meetings, and you know all the folks there. And so my wife and I love Kyiv. We love Ukraine. We have a lot of family members from Argentina who are Ukrainian Argentine because their diaspora is all over the world. So talk about the future. Talk about what are your hopes when this is over and when you win? And I hope, and I want, everyone here wants Ukraine to win. What does the future look like? Do you hope to join the European Union? What does, countries like Moldova 25 years ago had most of its economic ties to Russia. And then they got sort of a soft divorce. They've said, we're gonna orient to the West economically. And I know your economy is, Lena Kozarny, who you know, told me, and she chairs the Armchair in Ukraine, she said, Dan, it's hands, which is manufacturing, it's brains, which is ICT, it's an amazing ICT sector, and it's grains. So it's agribusiness and agriculture, hands, brains, and grains. So, and you have an amazing, unbelievable human talent. We've seen this in the war. So what does your economic future look like? How does the European Union fit into this? And is there going to be an opportunity, I mean, in this horror, in this awful, I don't want to gloss over what's happening. It's terrible. It's an awful, one of the worst human tragedies. This is just awful. But can we think a little bit beyond when the war ends and Ukraine wins? What does that look like?
Well, that's a great question. But there are a couple of layers in the answers to that question. So first is what Ukrainian people want, and what has been the inspiration and the reason behind our fight, not only against Russia in this war since 2014, but also against the pro-Russian autocratic dictators who tried to rule Ukraine, like Yanukovych, which led to the Revolution of Dignity. So the people of Ukraine has been very clear in where do we see them, where do we see the country. In 1999, at the beginning of the independence, 98% of Ukrainians voted to be independent, everywhere, including Crimea. That has been a choice, a civilizational choice, I should say. People did not know exactly what they are voting for. But they have been, because at the beginning of 1990, the economic situation horrible. Then we went into the period of hyperinflation. The country was poor after being occupied by the Soviet Union for such a long time. The Ukrainians have been oppressed, but all people wanted to live free. And I think this desire to live free and to be independent comes from a long, centuries-long history of Ukrainians fighting for freedom, and again remembering in our, genes how we have been free before Russia took over, Russian Empire took over, as late as 1708 or even earlier. So to be free, then we always felt and we wanted to be European. So for us, it's not joining the European Union, it's returning to our true self, it's who we are. It's respecting the freedoms and principles that are shared by all the European countries. It's, again, remembering that the Magdeburg Law and everything else in Ukraine have been exactly at the same time when it was everywhere in Europe. It's having one of the oldest universities, Kyiv, Mohyla, Ostrog Academy, others, which are in Ukraine. So Kyiv and Rus has been once a very vital center of Europe, and city of Kyiv, even though at that time it was 100,000 inhabitants, has been one of the largest cities in Europe at that time. But again, so to be free and to be European, and it's something I just want to remind you, in 2013, it was a couple of years after a brutal rule of Yanukovych, a couple of years after Russians, through Yanukovych and his team, has been overpopulating our governmental institutions with Russians, like Russians. I mean, the head of our Minister of Defense was a Russian citizen. Our Secret Service head was Russian citizen. So they have been preparing for this for a long time. They have been oppressing business. I mean, the pressure on business. And Western NAS can tell quite a number, and I was in the private sector, so we saw it all. But one thing that led to people to revolt was not that, was not oppression of business, was not anything else. It was the time when Yanukovych decided not to sign the association agreement with the European Union. So that tells you how important for Ukrainians is to become members of the European Union. Again, not to get some economic perks from it, but to feel that we returned where we always have been. And the third part is also the NATO, which actually is in our constitution. And I know during the full-fledged war, we do not talk about the NATO membership that much because, I mean, of course, it's a very difficult discussion to have right now, but more than 60% of Ukrainians support Ukraine joining NATO. It's in our constitution that not only European integration, but Euro-Atlantic integration is something that we view as our future, which again is understandable because we will always have, regardless of when we will win and defeat Russia, they will not move somewhere from our border. So we will always have a hostile country that, unless they go through a big process of deputinization and de-imperialization, will always be a threat, not only to us. So this is on the strategic layer where we see ourselves. Now, how to get there and how we will do it after we win. And it's not even a question for us whether we will win, because for Ukraine to exist, we must win. And we all believe, and the previous 112 days gives us not only hope, but also confidence that we can win. So first, I mean, when we win, that's when the hardest work will begin. As much as we love freedom and fight for freedom and have shown how capable we are in this fight, Ukraine has learned to build institutions, which again is not surprising because we didn't have our own institutions for 400 years that we have been occupied. And this past 30 years is the longest period of our statehood in the modern history of Ukraine. And of course, we made a lot of mistakes. And of course, because we didn't have the experience, the economy has been either heavily influenced by Russians, which, who didn't want to help us to build our own institutions for obvious reasons, but also captured by oligarchs, but people who wanted to use and misuse the new opportunities not to deliver for people, not to allow everyone to participate, not to increase the competitions, but actually, to rob country blind and just use it as the. So there is a lot we will have to do to use the reforms, and we've done remarkable reforms during the previous 8 years, from 2014 through 2022, and I see Vlad Rashkovan in the audience, who has been one of the co-authors of these reforms. We worked together as the team when I was at the Ministry of Finance, and Vlad was at the Central Bank as the Deputy Governor. But we have done a lot, and these reforms pays off, because we see that even after 2 years of COVID, even after 112 days of a full-fledged war, a number of countries would have collapsed.
You had the best numbers, Ambassador, on a macroeconomic level right before the war in terms of the amount of money that you had in your central bank. I think it was the highest Ukraine had ever had in terms of hard currency. So you guys had a hard COVID, but you had a lot of resiliency and continued to be doing better. You were at the high point of
well, I have to tell you, many teams of reformers paid heavy price for this difficult monetary reforms, fiscal consolidation reforms, anti-corruption reforms, judicial reforms. I mean, not all of them are complete, but those have been very hard reforms, not necessarily supported by the people. So if you go back to the press of 2015, 16, 17, you will not read a lot of nice things about us on the popular TV or the press, in the professional press. I mean, we're all praised by, and we see the results, again.
Totally.
But those are very difficult reforms, and we will have to do more of them after we win.
So.
But let me add one inspirational thing. Not only the hard reforms will be done, but I think Ukraine, as much as we inspire everyone with our fight, our goal is to inspire everyone how we can build our country back and how we can actually use this tragedy, the horrible loss of lives and loss of cities, to actually turn it into an opportunity and build something that will be the most innovative, that will be the most energy efficient, that would be something that we can leapfrog from 2022 and use all the best ideas and new technologies that any other of our countries have partners, but do not have the opportunity to implement them because you don't necessarily reform what works, right? But Ukraine can be this place where we really create this innovative new country, which could be an attraction for everyone, and there will be a lot of work and space for business, which we hope to attract in order to invest.
So, Ambassador, I live in the United States, and we have New Orleans, we have Chicago, we have New York, or we have Boston, where we've had some challenges in our governance in this country. So we've had issues of governance, and you, as a reformer, have taken on governance challenges in your own country. So, how do you respond to I get the sense, I think I heard you say that there may be still some work in progress. How do we think about some of the governance challenges in a place like Ukraine?
Well, first, I think the biggest challenge that all governments face, especially when they want to do the right thing, is in this time when the social media and the access to information and also access to participate in creating information is so easy, is how to explain to people what you do and how to get the message to people. And I think it has been a challenge in Ukraine. It has been the challenge everywhere, because in a democratic society, you want the people are the source of the power. You want them to understand and to support you, and it's becoming more and more difficult to do so. And it's becoming easier and easier for those who want to divert the country from the right path to misuse disinformation, fakes, propaganda, cyber attacks, which usually are coupled with disinformation. So some of these challenges are universal, some are more Ukraine-specific, because again, for centuries and for these 30 years, Russia has made us a testing ground for every bad things that they have in mind. So with regard to the cyber and disinformation attacks, I mean, whatever you've seen Russia do in the United States, it's been done to us a couple of years before.
And even far worse.
On a much larger scale. So I think, we have to, the challenge number one would be, and I think it's the, again, universal message for everyone. You have to fight for democracy during wartime and during peaceful time. Democracy is always work in progress. It's never given. You cannot reach democracy and say we are democratic now
It's all
Fine.
we're all done.
We're all done. No, every generation have to value democracy and fight for democracy. That's one. And second, you have to find this balance. How do you explain everything to people? How do you deliver you deliver it to people and explain what you can deliver and what you cannot? You have to be honest also with people that you cannot promise that everyone is going to be wealthy regardless of what they, you have to also, democracy is also about responsibility. And I think that's something that we do not see in Russia. I mean, the fact that Russian people support what Putin is doing is also a result of this imperialistic mode and the fact that they have occupied so many countries for also 400. So it's the same number of generations of Ukrainians who suffered. It's the same number of Russians who learned that there is one guy, you shift all the responsibility and you shift all the blame. It's a very easy concept to live in, because even now when people are polling Russians on the streets, and there is a great work that I think it's Radio Freedom doing under the different name Настоящее время, the real time. They just go around the streets of Russia and just ask people different questions. And while the majority of people, like overwhelming majority, which is really sad, support the actions, support the war and everything else, but when they're asked, and of course they say Bucha and everything else was staged and, other horrible things. But it's very interesting that when they're asked, what do you personally think about it? Do you think, because you as Russian responsible, 100% of them, not even majority, 100% say, what can I do? I'm a small person, it's not me, it's all the big guys, it's Putin, it's the government, what can we do? And this is a drastic difference between Ukraine and the U.S., where people say, it's up to me,
it's up to us.
Exactly. But it's a work in progress everywhere.
So, Ambassador, I know you have limited time. We want to respect your schedule. Would you be open to taking a couple questions from the audience? Okay, so question has to be a question, has to be short, name and organization, no grandstanding or I'll cut you off. Okay, so I'm happy to hear from some folks. Otherwise, I'll keep asking questions, so please go ahead, sir. Sir in the great suit, good suit.
Thanks.
Yeah, who's your tailor?
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll speak to you afterwards.
Yeah.
My name is Eric Hansen with the Center for International Private Enterprise. Glad to be here and glad to see you again today, Ambassador. My question is about the changing, we talked about this briefly, the changing political and economic or business culture in Ukraine as a result of the war. What sense do you have? After every big war in the United States, we see a shift in political and business culture. After the Civil War, after World War I, World War II, what appetite do you see for corruption with new politicians that will enter Ukrainian politics in the next 5 years? Ukrainian businesses setting up operations. How do you think the war will impact the culture, the ethics of doing business and doing government in the country?
Let's bunch them together, please. Go ahead. Use the microphone, though. For our television audience. So we have several hundred people watching online. We'll have several thousand people download it.
Madam
Ambassador, this woman after you. Yep.
So, Madam Ambassador, thank you. And Dan, thank you very much. My name is Matthew Murray. I teach at Columbia, and I'm a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce. A question about the vital role that Ukraine business can play bringing their technology, their assets, their human capital to the United States. In other words, it's a two-way street, trade and investment. And I think we've sort of lost sight of that in the midst of this war. And I happen to be in a position where I'm going to be bringing a Ukrainian titanium company to the Select USA conference that takes place annually in the United States in a couple of weeks to talk about the great technology they have and the great potential they bring our country in a industry which is very vulnerable, namely titanium. So my question is, do you have a sort of thought about how to communicate that out to the audiences in Washington?
Okay, this woman here, please, go up. Sorry we'll just bunch them together and give you a chance to think about it, Ambassador, what your answers are.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ambassador, to have you today. And my name is Noma Zarubina, and NGO Sail of Hope of the United Nations. During this strategic time, Russia holds an economic forum right now, and today is the main day, and it seems like the Russian government tries to reform the economic ways for the future. And my question is about sanctions. What kind of sanctions should we apply to influence more effectively in the future? What specific sanctions we need? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's just take those three. Go ahead.
Yes. So I'll start with because I think the question about business and trade development and the way we do business is very related questions. So first, of course, even now we are trying, and we have the system at the Ministry of Foreign Relations called Nazovni, which is a system to help exporters, Ukrainian exporters. It's very difficult, a lot of businesses destroyed, but a lot of businesses in Ukraine still operate and are trying to make the best use of selling their products or services, and we're trying to help them as much as we can, especially to bring them into the United States. So I will be participating in Select USA. We just had discussion yesterday with Secretary Raimondo, who has been very helpful on a number of issues, on the export controls and sanctions, but also on developing opportunities. And and we have a horrible situation with the blockade of the ports, where Russia blocked all Ukrainian exports, leading to the food security crisis, but also severely damaging our export potential, because this is, the best logistical way to export Ukrainian grains and metals and everything else through the ports. So we will be focusing on that a lot. Now, I think it has been very clear to everyone in Ukraine that we have to be, especially after we win, even more transparent, even more set to fight the corruption, even more on the path to create a level playing field so that business can actually thrive in Ukraine, whether Ukrainian or international business. And any international business, American business, that invests in Ukraine ultimately is a Ukrainian business for us. So we believe that we should fight for their rights and defend their businesses in Ukraine as much as we defend the Ukrainian business. Now, I think we've seen already during the past 8 years that we were able to narrow the field and the space for corruption tremendously. In public procurement was introduced in Prozora, in putting all the public finances transparently online, in allowing people to, now, it's not to say that everything is perfect, because everything is not perfect anywhere. Unfortunately, it's a human nature to exploit any of so that's why deregulation and everything else, which of course is difficult to do during the wartime, even though one of the key examples of a deregulation in play is how quickly we were able to get the Starlink into the country. And that has been a massive effort of the people back home, our Vice Prime Minister on digital transformation, but also the embassy, which using the direct order from the President Zelensky and allowing me to sign some of the agreements, was able to actually show how when we are deregulating process, we can get the new business and new capabilities so quickly into the country, and we intend to continue that. And the last point I wanted to say, it's very clear to Ukrainian people that stealing right now from the armed forces is a treason. It's not only corruption, because when we fight, every resource has to be spent in the most transparent way, and whoever is doing, bad things to steal or use or misuse, people are not going to tolerate it.
It's aid and comfort to the enemy.
Exactly.
It's aid and comfort to the enemy.
And I really believe that this attitude towards corruption will remain even after we win. So I think, there will be a big progress on that area. On the sanctions, a lot of sanctions have been implemented by the U.S. Not only U.S. implemented the sanctions itself, but also led a coalition of other partners in order to convince that the sanctions have to be multilateral, which is very important because, the sanctions are the most important when they are implemented by a number of parties, so that there is not a lot of places for Russia to go and evade the sanctions or bypass them. Right now, there are two, we believe, critical areas. where we still, I mean, of course, we're working on all fronts, and there is a long laundry list on what we're working on. But if I were to mention maybe not 2, 3 areas where we still think more can be done, and we are working with our partners on it. First is to sanction all Russian banks. There are 330 Russian banks operating in Russia. Only 11 of them, plus a couple of dozens of their subsidiaries, are on the full blocking sanctions lists, and only 8 are de-SWIFTed. I mean, with a couple of more maybe to join from the last package. So there is no such thing as private banking in Russia. Essentially, every time some banks are sanctioned, others, by the quick phone call from Kremlin, become a full replacement regardless of their size and the ownership. So we still believe that the more Russian banks are put, and preferably all, on this full blocking sanctions list, the faster they will significantly drop in their possibility to finance the war. Second is we're asking our partners to designate Russia as the state sponsoring terrorism. That will also send a very clear signal to everyone that not only Russia is that, but that people should be more quick in their plans on how to seize and their relations with Russia on many fronts. And third is individual sanctions. It's not just Putin's war. I mean, yes, Putin is a leader of the country, and it was his decision that was voiced publicly, but there are thousands, if not millions, of people who support that decision, who prepared all these decisions, who fight, who commit war crimes, who finance war crimes, who support either by their actions or failure to do some actions. So, as we believe, I remember when we fought with corruption in 2014, 2015, there was a slogan among Ukrainian activists that corruption has a name, meaning that there is a personal responsibility, and it's not just the top of the guys. So these personal sanctions for everyone who works and continue to work and continue to help Putin and Russian Federation to sustain this effort, the more people we can put on the sanctions, again, the faster there will be tangible results. So these 3 areas I would mention as key areas in the sanctions.
Ambassador, we know you have a really busy schedule. Could you all join me in thanking the ambassador, please? This is just really amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. I'll follow up with you at 4:30 tomorrow. Yes. It'll be a Zoom call. Thanks a lot.